I was a black single father, trapped in a snowstorm, stuck in a remote cabin with only one bed, and the woman lying next to me was the coldest CEO in the company, the one who had made my life hell for years. While my 12-year-old daughter performed the most important concert of her life, hundreds of miles away, I had no choice but to spend the entire night beside the most powerful woman I knew. No escape, no distance, no boundaries, and no one could have predicted that one night would change everything. The night before everything fell apart, I sat on my worn leather sofa with my daughter's head resting on my lap. Grace's fingers moved through the air, pressing invisible strings, rehearsing the piece she had practiced for months. "I'm going to play Saluda, Dad," she said, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. Mom's favorite. I stroked her braids gently. 5 years since cancer took my wife, and Grace still remembered, still held on to the violin like it was the last piece of her mother she could touch. "You're going to be amazing," I said. Grace sat up and turned to face me. At 12 years old, she had her mother's eyes, deep brown, too wise for her age. "You'll be there, right? Front row?" "Front row," I confirmed. I already requested the day off. "You promise?" The question landed harder than it should have. Grace knew why she asked. The school play I missed last spring, the parent-teacher conference I had to leave halfway through, the birthday dinner that turned into a phone call from the office parking lot. I took her hands in mine. "I promise, baby girl, nothing is going to stop me from watching you perform." Grace studied my face for a moment, searching for something. Then she smiled. Not the bright, full smile she used to have, but something softer, more guarded. "Okay, Dad." She leaned back against me, and I held her close, breathing in the scent of her coconut shampoo. Tomorrow I would finish my reports early. The day after, I would sit in that auditorium and watch my daughter play her mother's favorite song. Everything else could wait. The email arrived the next morning. I read it twice, hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something different. They didn't. The Henderson meeting, originally scheduled for next week, had been moved up to Chicago on the same day as Grace's concert. My stomach dropped. I walked to Rebecca Sterling's corner office with my heart pounding against my ribs. Through the glass walls, I could see her behind her desk, platinum blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, reading something on her screen with the same expression she always wore. Controlled, calculating, cold. They called her the Ice Queen. In 3 years at the company, I had never seen her smile, never heard her ask about anyone's weekend or family or life outside these walls. To Rebecca Sterling, employees were numbers on a spreadsheet. Either you produced results or you disappeared. I knocked on the glass door. "Come in." I stepped inside. The office smelled like expensive perfume and freshly printed paper. Rebecca didn't look up from her screen. "Miss Sterling, I need to discuss the Henderson meeting." "What about it?" The original date worked with my schedule, but this new date, I took a breath. My daughter has a concert. Her first solo performance. I've already committed to being there. Rebecca finally raised her eyes. They were pale gray, almost silver, and completely devoid of warmth. "Mr. Thompson, I didn't hire you to hear about your child's extracurricular schedule. I hired you to work." "I understand that, but this concert is a school event." She cut me off. "There will be others. The Henderson account is worth $14 million. There will not be another chance if we lose them." I felt the familiar heat rising in my chest. The same heat I'd learned to swallow down every time someone questioned my dedication, every time I had to work twice as hard to get half the recognition, every time a colleague with less experience got promoted over me because I seemed distracted or wasn't fully committed. "I haven't taken a single day off in 3 years," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I've hit every target, exceeded every quota. I'm asking for one day." Rebecca leaned back in her chair. "And that's exactly why you're still sitting in this building, Mr. Thompson. Don't turn your track record into a reason you have to leave." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. In this economy, with a daughter to feed and bills to pay, I couldn't afford to call her bluff. "The meeting is at 2 p.m. Chicago time," Rebecca continued, turning back to her screen. I'll see you at the airport tomorrow morning. That will be all. I stood there for a moment longer, fists clenched at my sides. Then I turned and walked out without another word. I made the call from the stairwell where no one could see me. Grace answered on the second ring. Dad, aren't you at work? Hey, baby girl. My voice came out rougher than I intended. Listen, I need to tell you something. Silence on the other end. She already knew. I could feel it. The company moved up a meeting. I have to fly to Chicago tomorrow. I tried to get out of it, but it's okay, Dad. The words were too quick, too practiced, like she had rehearsed them. I understand. Her voice was steady, controlled, the voice of a child who had learned not to expect too much. Work is important. I pressed my palm against the cold concrete wall. I'm going to fly back right after the meeting. I'll catch the first flight out. I might miss the beginning, but I'll be there for the second half, I promise. You don't have to. I want to. I need to see you perform. Another silence, then quietly, okay. I love you, Grace. Love you too, Dad. She hung up before I could say anything else. I stared at my phone, at the home screen photo of Grace grinning with her violin, taken 3 years ago when smiles still came easily. I had seen the look in her eyes too many times, that mixture of disappointment and resignation, the look that said she was tired of hoping. And the worst part was she didn't even cry. She didn't argue or beg or throw a tantrum like other kids might. She just accepted it like this was normal, like fathers breaking promises was simply how the world worked. I pressed my forehead against the wall and closed my eyes. The next morning, the airport was chaos. Holiday travelers rushed past with overstuffed bags and crying children, and I navigated through them with my small carry-on and a weight in my chest that wouldn't lift. I spotted Rebecca Sterling at the gate, charcoal suit, leather briefcase, reading a report like the noise around her didn't exist. She sat alone, an invisible barrier keeping the nearest passengers at least 3 seats away. I found a spot several rows behind her. I pulled out my phone and stared at the last message from Grace. Good luck at your meeting, Dad. No complaint, no guilt trip, just acceptance. I typed out a response. I'll make it to your concert, I promise. Then deleted it. I had already made that promise, making it again felt hollow. The boarding announcement crackled through the speakers. I watched Rebecca Sterling stand, smooth her jacket, and walk toward the gate without glancing at anyone around her. I wondered what it was like to move through the world so untouched. No guilt pulling at your sleeves. No little girl waiting at home, practicing her mother's favorite song alone in an empty apartment. Must be nice, I thought bitterly. As I joined the boarding line, my phone buzzed. A photo from Grace's grandmother. Grace in her white concert dress holding her violin, a nervous smile on her face. She's been practicing all morning, the text read. She's going to do great. I saved the photo and tucked my phone away. I just had to get through this meeting and get back home. I didn't know then that fate had other plans, that somewhere over the Midwest, a snowstorm was building and my life was about to change in ways I couldn't possibly imagine. The Henderson meeting wrapped up. I delivered my presentation flawlessly, answered every question, and watched Rebecca Sterling shake hands with the clients while they praised the company's vision. $14 million secured with a signature and a smile, or what passed for a smile on Rebecca's face. As the clients filed out, I checked my phone. The concert had already started back home. If I could catch the next flight, I might land in time for the aftermath, to hug Grace, to tell her I was proud, to prove that I tried. I was already pulling up the airline app when Rebecca's voice cut through my thoughts. The next flight is canceled. I looked up. Rebecca stood by the conference room window staring at her own phone, her expression unreadable. What? Check the weather. She turned the screen toward me. A mass of white and blue swirled across the radar map, covering everything between Chicago and the East Coast. Snowstorm. They were grounding all flights until the next day at the earliest. The phone nearly slipped from my hand like, that can't be right. There has to be something. A different airline, a connecting flight. I've already checked. Everything is canceled. Rebecca slipped her phone back into her briefcase. I've arranged alternative accommodation, a cabin about 40 minutes from here. It's the only available option that isn't a gymnasium floor at the airport. I barely heard her. I was scrolling through every airline app, every booking site, searching for anything that could get me home, but every search returned the same result. Canceled, canceled, canceled. Mr. Thompson, I looked up, desperation clawing at my chest. Rebecca's gray eyes held something I couldn't identify. There's nothing you can do. The storm is already here. As if to prove her point, snow began falling outside the window, thick, heavy flakes that blurred the city skyline into a wall of white. The cabin sat at the end of a winding road, surrounded by pine trees, bowed under the weight of fresh snow. It was small, painfully small, with weathered wooden walls and a single window that rattled with each gust of wind. Inside, I counted the essentials: a fireplace with a stack of logs beside it, a small table with 2 chairs, a kitchenette with running water, and 1 bed. A queen-sized bed with a faded quilt positioned against the far wall like an accusation. Rebecca surveyed the space with the same clinical detachment she brought to quarterly reports. It's not ideal, but it has heat and walls. That's more than most people will have tonight. I couldn't bring myself to respond. I stood by the window watching the snow fall harder, my phone pressed against my palm like a lifeline. The concert had started. I imagined Grace backstage, smoothing her white dress, checking her violin one last time. I imagined her looking toward the door, waiting for me to walk through, hoping. My phone buzzed, a text from Grace's grandmother. She's about to go on, she keeps looking at the door. My throat tightened. I typed back, "Tell her I love her. Tell her I'm sorry." The response came seconds later. "I will. She'll understand, Brandon. She always does." That was the problem. She always did. My phone rang. I answered before the first ring finished. "Dad?" Grace's voice was small, breathless. Behind her, I could hear the murmur of an audience. "Hey, baby girl, are you about to go on?" A shaky exhale. "I'm really nervous." "Don't be. You've practiced this piece 100 times. You know it by heart." "I know, but—" Her voice dropped. "I wish you were here." I closed my eyes. The words hit me like a physical blow. "I know, sweetheart. I wish I was there too. The storm. I know. Grandma told me." Grace's tone shifted, becoming that too steady voice I hated hearing from a 12-year-old. "It's okay. I understand." "Grace, listen to me. I want you to play that song like Mom is right there in the front row. Can you do that?" A soft sniffle. "Yeah. I am so proud of you. No matter what happens tonight, I am proud of the person you're becoming. Your mom would be too." "Thanks, Dad." Her voice cracked slightly. "I have to go. They're calling me." "Go show them what you've got. I love you." "Love you too." The call ended. I stared at the blank screen, my reflection ghost-like in the glass. Behind me, Rebecca stood completely still. She had heard everything. I knew she had. The cabin was too small for secrets. I expected her to say something dismissive, to remind me that business was business, that sacrifices were necessary, that children were resilient. Instead, she said nothing. When I finally turned around, I saw something flicker across her face, something that looked almost like recognition, like she was seeing me for the first time. Then it was gone, replaced by her usual mask of control. "The fire is dying," she said quietly. "I'll add more wood." The hours crawled by like wounded animals. I sat on the wooden chair by the window, staring out at the snow that showed no signs of stopping. Rebecca had claimed the bed, though she wasn't sleeping. She sat propped against the headboard, reading something on her tablet, the blue light casting sharp shadows across her face. Neither of us spoke. At some point, the silence became unbearable. I stood and walked to the fireplace, poking at the embers, even though they didn't need it. "Do you have children, Miss Sterling?" The question came out before I could stop it. I regretted it immediately. It was too personal, too invasive, the kind of question you didn't ask the Ice Queen. But Rebecca didn't freeze me out. She lowered her tablet and looked at the fire. "No, never wanted them." A long silence. Then, "I wanted them once. A long time ago." I waited. I didn't expect her to continue, but Something about the snow and the darkness and the enforced intimacy of the cabin seemed to loosen the walls she kept so carefully constructed. I was 25, Rebecca said, engaged to a man who wanted a family more than anything. He was kind, genuinely kind, the type who coaches Little League and remembers every anniversary. She pulled the blanket higher on her lap, her eyes still fixed on the flames. But I had just been promoted, my first major leadership role. I knew if I took time off for a wedding, for children, I would lose momentum. In this industry, you don't get second chances. A bitter smile crossed her lips. He said I was cold, that I didn't have a heart. Maybe he was right. I leaned against the mantel. What happened to him? He married someone else, has 3 kids now, lives in Connecticut. I saw the Christmas card last year. Rebecca's voice was matter of fact, but something underneath it trembled. He looked happy. Do you regret it? The question hung in the air between us. I don't allow myself to regret, Rebecca said finally. If I did, I wouldn't be able to get out of bed in the morning. I understood that more than I wanted to admit. The regrets I carried, every missed recital, every broken promise, every time I chose the job over my daughter, they lived in my chest like stones. Some days they were so heavy I could barely breathe. At 30, I had another chance, Rebecca continued. A pregnancy, unplanned, unexpected. Her jaw tightened. It was the same year I was offered the CEO position. I felt my breath catch. I made my choice, she said. And I've lived with it for 15 years. The fire crackled. Snow hissed against the window. In the silence, I saw Rebecca Sterling, not as the ice queen, not as the heartless boss who had ruined my week and possibly my relationship with my daughter, but as a woman who had sacrificed everything and wasn't sure it was worth it. I'm sorry, I said. I meant it. Rebecca looked at me then, her gray eyes reflecting the firelight. Don't be. I made my choices just like you make yours. She tilted her head slightly. Tell me about your wife. The request surprised me, but turnabout was fair play and the night was long. I moved to the other chair closer to the fire. Jessica, her name was Jessica. We met in college. She was studying music education. I was studying finance. Complete opposites. A small smile tugged at my mouth. She used to say I was too serious, that I needed to learn how to breathe. She sounds lovely. She was. The smile faded. When she got sick, everything changed. Grace was 7. Jessica made me promise 2 things. Raise Grace to be kind and never let her give up the violin. I nodded. The violin was Jessica's. She played in a community orchestra. Nothing professional, but she loved it, said music was how she processed the world. I stared at my hands. Grace has her talent, her passion. Sometimes when I hear her practice, it's like Jessica is still here. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. That must be beautiful and devastating in equal measure. It is. More silence. But it was different now. Softer, less hostile. 2 people sitting with their wounds exposed, too tired to pretend they weren't bleeding. Being a black man in corporate America, I said slowly, you learn early that you have to work twice as hard for half the recognition. You can't show weakness, can't ask for help, can't let anyone see you struggle. Rebecca listened without interrupting. I thought if I just worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, I could build something for Grace. A life where she wouldn't have to fight as hard as I did. I let out a heavy breath. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being a father and became just a provider. A paycheck that comes home too late and leaves too early. You're being too hard on yourself. Am I? I shook my head. Tonight, my daughter played the most important concert of her life. And I wasn't there. Again. At some point, I understand stops being forgiveness and starts being surrender. Rebecca uncrossed her legs and leaned forward slightly. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for. She's 12. She shouldn't have to be resilient. My voice cracked. She should get to be a kid who knows her dad will show up every time. No exceptions. The cabin fell silent again. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows in their frames. Rebecca rose from the bed and walked to the small kitchenette. She found 2 mugs and filled them with water, heating them over the small gas burner. I don't have tea, she said, but warm water is better than nothing. She handed me a mug. Our fingers brushed briefly. Her skin was cold. Thank you, I said. Rebecca returned to the bed, but didn't lie down. She sat on the edge facing me. I used to play piano, she said. When I was Grace's age, my mother made me practice 2 hours every day. Did you love it? I hated it. A ghost of a smile. But I was good at it. My teacher said I could have gone to conservatory if I'd kept at it. Why didn't you? Because being good at something isn't the same as loving it, and I loved winning more than I loved music. She wrapped her hands around her mug. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd made different choices, if I'd been brave enough to want something other than success. I studied her face in the firelight. The sharp angles seemed softer now. The coldness melted into something more human. It's not too late, I said. Rebecca shook her head. It is for some things. Children, family, the life I could have had. She met my eyes. But maybe it's not too late for other things. The fire had burned down to glowing embers. Rebecca rose and retrieved an extra blanket from the closet, draping it over my shoulders. The gesture was small, wordless, but it said more than any speech could have. I looked up at her. I can sleep on the floor. You don't have to. The floor is freezing, and that chair will destroy your back. Rebecca's tone was brisk, but not unkind. The bed is large enough for 2 adults to share without impropriety. She walked back to the bed and slipped under the covers, positioning herself on the far edge. I hesitated. This was my boss, the woman who had forced me to miss my daughter's concert, the ice queen who had made my professional life miserable for years. But she was also a woman who had just shown me her scars, and I was too exhausted to keep fighting. I moved to the bed and lay down on top of the quilt, keeping a careful distance between us. The mattress was softer than the chair, and my body ached with gratitude. We lay in darkness, staring at the ceiling, listening to the storm rage outside. My phone buzzed. I fumbled for it, heart racing, a text from Grace's grandmother. She did beautifully, standing ovation, but she cried after she came off stage. She kept asking where you were. The words blurred. I pressed the phone against my chest, feeling the tears slide down my temples and into my hair. I tried to be quiet, tried to swallow the grief. But in the darkness, there was nowhere to hide. A hand found my wrist. Rebecca's fingers wrapped around it gently, not gripping, just resting there. You're not a bad father, she said softly. You're a man trying to survive in a world that never gives you enough. Enough time, enough grace, enough room to be human. I couldn't speak, I just lay there, tears flowing freely now, feeling the warmth of her hand on my skin. I'm sorry, Rebecca whispered. For the meeting, for the timing, for all of it. I didn't know. She stopped. No, that's not true. I didn't want to know. It was easier not to see. I turned my head toward her in the dim light from the dying embers. I could see the outline of her profile, the slight tremble in her jaw. I see you now, she said. I see what it cost you to be here. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then I placed my hand over hers, pressing it more firmly against my wrist. Thank you, I said. My voice was hoarse, broken. For seeing. We lay like that as the storm continued to rage, 2 strangers who had become something else in the span of a single night, not lovers, not even friends, just 2 people who had finally allowed themselves to be seen. And in that small cabin buried in snow, something shifted, something healed, something changed. Morning light cut through the cabin window like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world buried in white silence. I opened my eyes slowly. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I felt the unfamiliar mattress beneath me, saw the wooden beams above, and remembered everything. Rebecca was already awake, standing by the window with her back to me. She had changed into fresh clothes from her carry-on, her platinum hair pulled back into its usual severe bun. The woman from last night, The one who had shared her regrets, who had held my wrist in the darkness, seemed to have vanished with the storm. "The roads are being cleared," she said, without turning around. "I've arranged for a car to take us to the airport. There's a flight leaving at noon." I sat up, my body stiff from the unfamiliar bed. "Thank you." Rebecca finally turned, her gray eyes met mine, and for a brief moment something passed between us, an acknowledgement of what had happened in the darkness. Then her professional mask slid back into place. "I'll wait outside," she said. "Take whatever time you need." She walked out without another word, leaving me alone with the dying embers and the weight of everything that had changed. The flight home felt endless. I stared out the window at the clouds below, my mind already racing ahead to the conversation I would have to face. Grace's grandmother had texted that morning. "She's been quiet, hasn't touched her violin since the concert." Those words haunted me more than anything else. When the taxi finally pulled up to my apartment building, I felt my heart hammering against my ribs. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. The door was unlocked. Inside, Grace sat on the worn leather sofa, the same spot where she had rested her head in my lap just 2 nights ago. Her violin case lay beside her, unopened. She was still wearing her white concert dress, now wrinkled from sleep. She didn't run to greet me. She didn't even stand up. "Hey, baby girl," I said softly, closing the door behind me. Grace looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, puffy. "Hey, Dad." I crossed the room and sat down beside her, leaving a small gap between us. "Are you angry with me?" Grace shook her head slowly. "I'm not angry." "Then what?" She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "I'm just sad." The simplicity of the words broke something inside me. Not angry, sad. Anger I could have fought against, apologized for, made promises to fix. But sadness was different. Sadness was the quiet acceptance of disappointment. Sadness was what happened when a child stopped expecting things to be different. "I'm sorry," I said. My voice cracked. "I'm so sorry, Grace. I should have been there. I should have found a way. You always say that." "I know." I turned to face her fully, tears already blurring my vision. "And I know my words don't mean much anymore, but I need you to understand something." Grace looked at me, waiting. "When your mom got sick," I continued, "she made me promise to take care of you, to give you everything you needed. I thought that meant working hard, making money, building a future for you." I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, but I was wrong. What you needed was me, just me, and I wasn't there. The tears came then, streaming down my face in a way I hadn't allowed myself to cry in years. Not at Jessica's funeral, not in the months of grief that followed. I had always been the strong one, the rock, the father who held everything together, but I couldn't hold it together anymore. "Dad," Grace's voice was small, uncertain. I pulled her into my arms, sobbing into her braids. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." For a long moment, Grace was stiff in my embrace. Then her arms came up around my back, and she held me the way I had held her so many times before. "It's okay, Dad," she whispered. "You can cry. Mom always said crying doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human." I held my daughter tighter, feeling the truth of Jessica's words through our child. Grace was comforting me. This 12-year-old girl who had every right to be angry, to push me away, was instead offering me grace. I didn't deserve it, but I would spend the rest of my life trying to. 1 week later, Rebecca Sterling called me into the conference room. I walked in expecting the worst, a formal reprimand, a demotion, maybe even termination for my emotional display in Chicago. Instead, I found Rebecca standing alone by the window holding a small envelope. "Close the door," she said. I obeyed, my guard up. Rebecca turned to face me. She looked different somehow. Not softer exactly, but less armored. The Ice Queen was still there, but cracks had appeared in the facade. "I made some calls this week," she said. "Yeah, to your daughter's school." I frowned. "Why?" "Because I learned that Grace's performance earned her an invitation to the National Youth Music Festival next month." Rebecca held out the envelope. These are plane tickets for both of you." I took the envelope, too stunned to speak. "I also wanted to tell you," Rebecca continued, "that I'm implementing some changes to company policy, flexible scheduling for single parents, remote work options for employees with caregiving responsibilities." She straightened her shoulders. "It's long overdue." I stared at her. "Why are you doing this?" Rebecca walked to the window, gazing out at the city skyline. "That night in the cabin, I told you I don't allow myself to regret, but the truth is I've spent 15 years running from my choices, burying them under work and success and the belief that sacrifice was the only path." She turned back to face me. "I can't undo what I gave up, the family I didn't have, the life I didn't choose, but I can make sure other people don't have to make the same sacrifices I did." I felt a lump forming in my throat. "You're not as cold as you think you are." A small smile crossed Rebecca's face, the first genuine smile I had ever seen from her. "Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation to maintain." 1 month later, I sat in the front row of the National Youth Music Festival auditorium. The seat beside me was occupied by Rebecca Sterling, dressed in a simple navy dress instead of her usual power suit. She had asked to come, hadn't explained why, and I hadn't pressed. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the audience, and then Grace walked onto the stage. She looked so small under the bright lights, her white dress glowing against the darkness. But when she lifted her violin and placed it under her chin, something transformed. She wasn't a nervous 12-year-old anymore. She was a musician. The first notes of Saluda filled the auditorium, Jessica's favorite song played by Jessica's daughter in front of the father who had finally learned to show up. I felt the tears sliding down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall, let myself feel everything I had spent years suppressing. Beside me, Rebecca sat perfectly still, but when I glanced over, I saw her looking down at her own hands, hands that had once played piano, that had once held the possibility of a different life. The song ended, the audience erupted in applause. Grace took her bow, her face radiant with joy. Her eyes found me in the front row, and her smile grew even wider. After the performance, Grace came running through the crowd and threw herself into my arms. "Dad, you came. You really came." "I promised," I said, holding her tight. "And this time, I meant it." Grace pulled back and noticed Rebecca standing nearby. "Who's this?" Rebecca knelt down to Grace's eye level. "I'm a friend of your father's, and I think you played beautifully tonight." Grace beamed. Thank you." The three of us walked out of the auditorium together into the cool evening air. Grace held my hand, chattering excitedly about the performance, the other musicians, the possibility of doing this again next year. I caught Rebecca's eye over my daughter's head. No words passed between us. None were needed. What we shared wasn't romance or attraction. It was something rarer, understanding. The recognition of two people who had finally allowed themselves to be seen. That night in the cabin, I had thought I'd lost everything, but looking at my daughter's smile, feeling the warmth of her hand in mine, I realized the truth. Everything had changed, not because of scandal, not because of a shared bed, but because two strangers had finally been brave enough to see each other, truly see each other, in the darkest moment of our lives. And sometimes that's all it takes to find your way home. Going through that intense night, trapped in the cabin during the blizzard, completely changed how I see life. And if you've ever felt the ache of choosing work over the people you love most, I know this lesson will hit you right in the heart like it did for me. The biggest truth I walked away with is that no career success, no big promotion, and no amount of money is ever worth missing the precious moments with your kids. I had been so focused on providing for Grace that I was forgetting to actually be there for her, breaking promises that left her smiling through the hurt because she'd learned not to expect too much. That stormy night with Rebecca showed me that behind every strict boss or ice queen is a real person carrying their own hidden regrets and heartaches, just like me. When we take the time to truly see each other, share our vulnerabilities, and let the walls come down, something powerful happens. Healing begins, and we remember we're all just human beings trying to survive. I realized it's never too late to choose family over deadlines, presence over empty promises, and love over ambition. Being a good dad isn't about being perfect, it's about showing up even when it's hard and letting your child see you cry so they know it's okay to feel everything. If this story moved you as much as it did me, tell me in the comments right now. What's the most important life lesson you took away from this, or what promise to your own family do you want to keep starting today? And where in the world are you watching from? I read every single comment because your stories matter to me. If you want more heartfelt tales that remind us what really counts, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support keeps these emotional journeys coming, and I can't wait to hear from you. Let's build this community together.